Hello, listeners. This is Kat, and welcome back to Put Your Hands Up Podfics. This will be the continuation of Throw a Chair Through a Window and Call It a Day. This will be Part 7, Chapter 7, entitled Not Much Has Changed, but They Live Underwater. It was a rare occurrence for Shota to have nothing to do. His life was a never-ending cycle of teaching, patrols, dragging Midnight out of clubs when she was too drunk to realize she was still wearing her hero costume, dragging himself out of clubs when Midnight tried to score both of them a job interview, and so on. And through it all, he dealt with it by consuming copious amounts of black coffee, silently cursing out Vlad's existence, and logical ruses. He also dealt with it by carrying the small idea with him that every second he spent teaching was one less hero trainee that would die in the field. Not that he would ever say that out loud, or even to himself. But here he is, a cup of coffee on one side of him, and one of the only people that could carry out logical ruses on the other, and he had nothing to use them to get through. No paperwork, no assignments, no nothing. He was actually free for once, and he had no idea what to do about it. Should he just be grateful and sleep for the rest of the day? Should he spend the next 6 hours trying to give Vlad a heart attack? Who knows? Certainly not Shota. But in all honesty, he should have seen this coming. It was like the perfect storm if you considered free time a storm. After counseling sessions last week, most of the kids here were pretty at ease, and they already had the whole weekend to think things over. Vlad was covering for all his graded assignments, his patrol hours were cut down due to his employment position, and most of the issues he and Midoriya wrote down had either been solved along the way or unable to be done at the current moment, like his extremely elaborate revenge on multiple people. So yeah, that's what brings him to now, bored as hell and apparently wishing he had something to do. God, what is wrong with him? Probably a lot of things, but he'll save the crisis for later. Right now he wants to forget his non-existent sleep schedule and be busy again. Looking away from his mug of coffee, he spun in his chair to face the kid, the same kid who immediately looked up from his notebook, that now had an All Might sticker on it, as if he sensed his teacher's thoughts like a dog senses a tsunami. "Problem child," the underground hero began. "Status report on anything you can think of at this school." Most would find that question horribly general and overwhelming, but this is Midoriya we're talking about. Overwhelming isn't a word that fits in his vocabulary. Right! The green-haired boy flipped to a page in his notebook, and Shota had long since learned not to question why the kid already had the exact information needed at the ready. Snipe-sensei and Midnight-sensei appear to have gone on an actual date last Friday. Shota feels like a matchmaker. Mike-sensei keeps throwing overly enthusiastic thumbs up at Shinso, who doesn't seem to know why. Yes, Hisashi has been a sort of enigma lately. The blonde man had asked him a question about fostering a teenager, then immediately backtracked, not bringing it up since. It was weird, to say the least. Katan keeps looking at me when he thinks I won't notice, and he's obviously failing, but the point is that I also don't know why, and I'm starting to think I should just stare back to see how he reacts. Minetta's parents tried to file a lawsuit, but All Might just smiled at them and they backed off. Shinso invited me to go get coffee after school, so that's awesome. Huh? I just don't know why he asked me while hanging upside down from the ceiling vent. Midoriya pressed his pencil to his chin and thought, Shota's question falling on deaf ears. I don't want to take away his new strategic mode of transportation, but I find it concerning how he was able to access them so easily. I would sum it up to the stealth training he started doing ever since he learned he would be transferring to the hero course next semester, but I don't recall teaching him how to break open ventilation systems. The erasure hero paused, and then very quietly muttered, But if he's leaving any traces of evidence behind, maybe I should. The green-eyed boy continued with his report as if his teacher's comment wasn't shocking in the slightest, and Shota guessed it wouldn't be to anyone who's been in his presence for longer than 10 minutes. Hell, even Hawks didn't flinch the last time he mentioned throttling the hero commission. If he didn't know any better, he'd say the red-winged man might have even agreed, if the nod was anything to go by. But anyway. Because if that vent was easy enough to break into from the inside or outside, who even knows how many others are exactly the same? This might even apply to outside training grounds, the basement, or one of the many gates, so at some point there should really be another routine check from the mechanics of UA. Midoriya finished. Yeah, why hasn't there been one, actually? Shota would have assumed that after last year's security breach, the school would have upped the ante by now. The underground hero straightened up from his previously slouched position, furrowing his eyebrows at the sudden realization as he burned holes into his computer screen. You know, maybe this was the reason his eyes burned so much. I have a feeling you keep random records of UA's history in your notebooks, so... Shota started, and the kid nodded, to absolutely no one's surprise. When was the last time anyone checked on the security detail besides just the heroes inside the school? He asked, but the tired man had a feeling that he already knew the answer, an answer he wasn't going to enjoy. Forest green eyes scanned the contents of a page until suddenly all movement ceased. June of last year. It's January. Yeah, he most definitely didn't enjoy that answer. Well, that's concerning. And it was, way more than he expected it to be. Quickly, Shota pulled up the blueprints of UA on Nezu's computer, once again wincing as the bright blue light stung into his eyes. Nezu's security cameras cover quite a lot of space in UA. All the entrances and exits, the classrooms and hallways, even the smallest corner of a training ground. Unfortunately, there will always be blind spots that we can't reach, but that's normal. The underground hero squinted at his screen. What isn't normal is that those blind spots just happen to be right next to some basement cellar doors, windows, pillars by the front gates, vents. Honestly, good for Shinso. And security keypads. Why the hell are there no cameras there? What, there's one by the coffee machine, because Nezu doesn't trust that Shota won't steal their entire supply. He would, but that's not important right now. But all that distrust completely disappears when it comes to guarding doors. If that's just the physical blind spots, his student mumbled, then what about the online ones? When was the last time UA had an IT guy take a look at their servers? He doesn't even want to know. Well, it looks like we know what we're doing today. Did they, though? The only thought Shota could process in his brain right now was, security bad, fix security, no limits, just fix it. And if that wasn't confusing enough, why does this inner voice talk like a depressed cookie monster? Mechanics and tech guys won't be able to come on such short notice, even for a hero school, and I'd like to get it done today before Nezu can question my tactics. So we have to... Wait, huh? We'll be doing their jobs? Shota could provide an answer to the boy when he himself wasn't even sure. Yes and no. Mostly no. I'm sure they have a far more professional way about going about these types of things, and since neither of us got a degree in whatever the hell this is, I doubt we'll be able to replicate that, but we do have to get an idea of how good the defense mechanisms in the school are either way, if we can't fix all the problems we may find. The goal is to find as many problems in the school as possible and hand the list over to the actual mechanics later on, when they actually have the time and the resources to take care of it. That way, saves everyone some time and gives us something to take care of. Midoriya breathed out, processing the plan as Shota nodded in confirmation. Yeah, you're right. That doesn't sound professional at all. And there's a good chance this is going to backfire horribly. However, there's a greater chance of this being effective. Just one question, though. How do we know which areas to check? UA is quite a big place. The areas I listed earlier that have no security cameras near them should be the main spots to test out. But I'd suggest also giving an evaluation to the visible areas. There's nothing sneakier than villains going in through plain sight. There's nothing more embarrassing, too. Main things to check off would be online firewalls, durability, and any of the defense mechanisms Nezu might have implemented without our knowledge. The lack of security is alarming, but we can't forget that Nezu is one of the smartest living beings alive. It'd be stupid to underestimate him. It'd be deadly, too, as Shota had learned during his first year when a classmate got called to the rat's office and came back looking like a soldier with PTSD. Ah, but what about the way we're actually going to test all those requirements? The green-haired kid asked, the curiosity in his eyes quickly morphing into anxiety as he saw his teacher's stoic face melt into that familiar sadistic grin. No one could blame him, and Shota wanted to feel bad. He really did, but this was just too good of an opportunity to pass up. He'd been repressing his pettiness and spite against the school for way too long. This gives him the perfect way to let it all out in the most spectacular way possible. Plus, it's a good learning experience for the kid. Or at least, that's what he's going to tell himself and everyone else when they question the excessive amounts of cackling and property damage. Nothing a few highly destructive quirks, support items, and hacking skills can't solve. A quiet rumbling sound came from his throat as barely noticeable evil laughs sprouted out, but his villain origin story was shut down just as quickly when his bright-eyed secretary spoke up, a pitying expression on his face as he twirled the mechanical pencil around his fingers. I'm completely on board, as expected. And I think May will be too, also expected. But I think it's that exact fact, which will have Powerloader Sensei vandalizing every piece of property you own. Maybe even Cementos too. No, you're absolutely right. I will have to expect multiple assassination attempts after today. Keyword being attempts. No offense, but Powerloader's costume wasn't built for stealth. He doubts the man will be able to escape his notice long enough to leave a scratch on him, let alone slit his throat. But it's a risk I'm going to have to take. Desperate times call for desperate measures, after all. So should I give him a small heads up, or just let him watch it all go down with no condolences? Shota raised his eyebrows. He definitely underestimated the changes that went down during his short time as principal. For starters, the underground hero thinks he actually laughed, and that's jarring enough in itself. As for Midoriya, He's a lot more sadistic than how he was last Monday. Not that the tired man is complaining, though. A kid with a mind as analytical as that, paired with a mercilessly brutal personality, opened up a whole new world of possibilities. Granted, most of these possibilities were not exactly what Japan would call, All Might level plus ultra. Actually, it might be considered a Nezu level national security threat. But whatever, for once in Chota's pitiful life, he should focus on the positives. No condolences. It's more fun that way. And besides, brilliant scarlet sparks crackled to life in the edges of his irises. That'll show Majima not to mess with my fucking sleeping bag. The chill breezes swept around the earth, haphazardly ruffling Izuku's green hair as he clutched the small computer in his hands. Aizawa-sensei was by his side, at the foot of UA's towering front gates, only way less anxious about the whole situation. Izuku had hoped he would have left behind this kind of paranoia when he got this position as secretary, but he guesses some things never change. It's not like anyone can blame him, though. Their new course of action was pretty crazy today, even for them, and boy, that's a high bar. The One-for-All user liked to consider himself a good student. He never missed an assignment. He didn't interrupt teachers during class, and the way he wore his uniform wasn't as bad as it could have been, at least if you ignore the tie. So, from an outside perspective, the staff would have no reason to have a vendetta against him. However, if they see him causing thousands of dollars worth of property damage on the #1 hero school, that would most definitely change. He's positive, let it be known, that that term is being used very lightly, that he wouldn't get expelled. But then again, Murphy's Law seems to be playing a defining role in his life. Aizawa-sensei also has a very low chance of getting fired for this stunt, given all that he's done for the school and his years of experience, but even if he did, Izuku didn't think that that would be much of a problem. Sure, everyone would miss him. His teachers would cry, his class would cry, Izuku would probably drown everyone in his self-made river, but the underground hero himself would probably be celebrating. Think about it. More sleep, no more problem children to take care of, no more scary mouse bosses watching his every move, and no more Vlad King. And although the forest-eyed boy is glad that this is purely hypothetical, the man being happy about a termination would be the most logical conclusion. Oh my god, since when did he start saying logical? Hello, Hell students. Shinzo, problem child. I'm sure you're wondering why you're all here today, and I can tell you with 100% certainty that it's none of your business. Of course. I hope that was a good enough motivation to put your all in today's special project. But if not, I'll let the person who does their job the best today adopt Vlad King's dog. Izuku would laugh, but him laughing would make others think his teacher was just being snarky, which he most definitely wasn't, and the others seemed to have realized it too, as they immediately perked up at the concept of getting a fluffy new friend, completely ignoring the fact that it would be a stolen animal. It's fine, though. Izuku and Aizawa-sensei chose to ignore a lot of pain and suffering when it came to Vlad-sensei. The green-haired boy's ears managed to pick up the faint sound of snapping fingers, and, as if it was a reflex, immediately whipped out his notebook and flipped to the page he'd written for today. When did Aizawa-sensei start snapping? When had Izuku taken that as a sign to start rambling? He doesn't remember, but he's sure as hell not going to stop now. Besides, he'd be lying if he said he didn't enjoy getting the chance to fully explain his thoughts to others more. Most people completely ignored him when he started muttering, but ever since last week, people had started to listen to what he had to say. And that hadn't even changed after Midoriya told the man he used to be quirkless. Maybe it was because it was related to their jobs, or because Aizawa-sensei intimidated them enough to keep them from tuning out. But Izuku didn't care. It was a new experience and something he wouldn't take for granted, especially on the last full day of the secretarying he had. After this, he'd never get another chance. The elaborate but thought-out plans, the speeches, the slight emotional manipulation, the planning of Vlad-sensei's downfall that Izuku still didn't fully understand, and last but never least, the snapping. All of it would end, and it'd never happen again. Izuku blinked hard, plastering a slightly strained smile on his face before reading out the explanation for today's plan. He chose to ignore the burning sensation of someone's eyes on him. Hello, everyone. Welcome to the annual security check. He did jazz hands once again, getting absolutely nothing in response except for more scared glances. Oh no, is this how President Mike-sensei feels during the entrance exam? Izuku really should have said yeah with him. Today we'll be testing out some of UA's defense mechanisms and making sure everything's up to date, logging down what's A-OK and what needs improvements. There's going to be 3 stages in this process, none of which have a catchy acronym, so please don't attack me for that. Online breach, stealth mode, and physical destruction. Don't worry about the last one, though. It'll be close to harmless. Izuku flipped the page and continued, ignoring Kachan's disbelieving look at the last comment, and broke all the students into groups of 3. And my god, he suddenly understands why Aizawa-sensei hates being a teacher. There were no major problems involved when he invited Mei to his own personal group because, despite the differences in their personalities, they both have one thing in common. the raging insanity that comes with analyzing heroes as support items. But because he made the decision to help out Momo earlier, a stupid idea really, and shoo Mei away from what she calls potential investors, he has now put himself in the danger of being her number one client. And don't get him wrong, he knows his pink-haired friend has the potential to be one of the greatest in her line of work. That doesn't mean he wants to get blown to pieces before he graduates. Although, according to All Might, there was a chance he could have blown himself up before he even got here, and yeah, he's going to think about that for the rest of his life. The stealth mode group wasn't too bad by Izuku's standards, but the moment he called on Shinso, Setsuna, Kororo, Shoji, and Jiro, the Black Parade just started playing. Why did Shinso have it ready to go on his phone? Why did Aizawa-sensei nod his head in respect? He didn't know, but that didn't stop the green-haired boy from giving a few comforting pats to Tokiyami's back when he shed a single tear. The same couldn't be said for Hagakure, though, as, judging by the sleeves on her blazer, she tried to make JSL distress signs at Ojiro before realizing no one would see it because of her invisibility. It was a sad sight. The physical destruction group, on the other hand, was, well, destructive. Kaminari gave finger guns and nodded his head. Bakugo tried to blow up said head, but with a split second of hesitation, is Izuku hallucinating or has the world turned upside down? And Kirishima's too good for this world, having jumped right into the trajectory of the explosion, as he shielded the electric blonde with tears in his eyes. It was admirable, but once again sad, as Kaminari had already run off the moment he saw Kachan's hand moving in his direction. A wise choice, really. Then finally, after recruiting Kendo, Uraraka, Momo, Ojiro, and Monoma, he shut his notebook with a slap. Well, now that that's done, the green-haired boy's eyes glowed with barely concealed excitement, missing the way his teacher smirked and his classmates shivered at the sudden change in the atmosphere. Let's get this show on the road. Nezu was weird. That much Shota was sure of. Before he'd even gotten to UA, he had heard horror stories about the rat. He was well aware of the creature's blatant contempt for humans, his habit of psychologically tormenting his students, and the awfully messy way he'd drink his tea, but still, not a single one of those legends could have prepared him for the moment when he finally met the pesky chimera after being called into his office on the first day of his hero course transfer. He wasn't surprised at being called in. Really, it was more or less expected. But why would he be? After all, that's how it had been for every other school he'd attended. They'd ring him in, give some poorly disguised threats about what would happen if he got a single detention at the school, and kick him right back out as if it had never happened at all. It wasn't like he had done anything to warrant that kind of warning, but he guesses his quirk was enough reasoning for them. So yeah, it wasn't surprising to meet with the principal on the first day. What was surprising, however, was when the sadistic rodent poured him a cup of Earl Grey tea, slid a plate of lavender shortbread cookies over to him, and asked but more or less demanded that he became his personal student and attend meetings every Tuesday and Thursday. It was, as he'd said, weird. The black-haired man's not going to lie. The number one thought on his mind at that moment was deciding if Nezu had quick enough reflexes to dodge a cup of scalding hot liquid, and if Shota could sprint out the front doors fast enough to escape without being hunted by the hero teachers. But in the end, he was smart enough to realize that no one could escape whatever fate the S-level threat had planned for them, and that it was better to be wary and comply than recklessly run for his life. And, oddly enough, that was the topic of their first lesson. Nezu taught him everything he knows, bar the physical aspects of being a hero, from picking and choosing his battles, to observing the smallest movements of the people around him, to intimidation techniques, and all the way to hacking into the police database. You see it in a spy movie, and chances are Nezu most likely gave him a 30-minute rambled lecture on it. Now you may be wondering, Shota, why in the ever-loving fuck would he teach you all of that? Truth is, he doesn't know. Or at least, he didn't. He remembers how about halfway through his third year at UA, he had finally gathered up enough courage to ask Nezu why he'd been picked out of the blue like that, and why he had to participate in some not even extra credit classes twice a week. Not that he was complaining, and from a completely logical standpoint, you would probably expect Nezu to give an hour-long answer to that question that may or may not, but definitely may, tie back to your great-great-grandfather, except that's not what happened. No, he didn't get a detailed explanation for the reasoning behind all those lessons. He didn't even get an evil cackle. You know what he got? He got a shrug. The smartest living thing in probably the entirety of Japan had just passed up the opportunity to give a TED Talk and shrugged. The beady-eyed rodent spouted some spiritual shit about how once in a blue moon he comes across a student he just feels has potential. Potential for what exactly? He doesn't know, but maybe that's where Shota got the whole shtick from. He'd asked again for clarification, but all he'd gotten in return was that he'd only understand once he saw it with his own eyes. And once he did, He had to make sure he'd do what Nezu did for him. He would later freak out about how Nezu knew he'd become a teacher. But for the next 15 years, he would occasionally think back to that moment and wonder if Nezu had the rat equivalent of a rebellious teenager phase and smoked weed during that conversation. Because what the actual hell was he on to say all that? Potential to steal case files and not get caught? Potential to traumatize 20 kids just by smiling? Contorting a hole in his face seems like a more accurate term, really, but still. He didn't understand Nezu's motivation for taking him on as a personal student. Didn't. It's past tense because right now, standing behind Midoriya in a way that resembles a storm cloud casting a foreboding shadow over Verdant Valley, he realizes it's this. This is what Nezu meant when he claimed Shota had potential. He didn't go into detail because he couldn't go into detail. Looking at the calculatingly eyed kid, right now, he can't seem to get an accurate reading. It's like any of his future actions were some kind of breathtaking, unpredictable wild card. No one knew what was going to happen once it was drawn, but then knew it would make a powerful impact nonetheless. It was an open door of possibilities, and the underground hero is going to do what his old principal did for him, and nurture that potential, especially since no one else had even bothered to try. And when the time comes for this secretary-principal thing to end, he'll be damned if he lets the kid's growth end with it. Actually, now that he thinks about it, this whole gig ends tomorrow afternoon. Shit. And as it stands, me and May are the only kids in the class who know the basics of hacking. The bloodshot-eyed man was shaken out of his rising panic by the sound of Midoriya's chipper voice, blinking away the shock as he saw the kid dart his fingers across the keyboard. God, he was talking about nurturing the talent, but here he is watching the world around him as if it's some sort of movie. But since she's way more advanced than me, at the moment, she's going to be handling breaking into the staff's computer servers to get a hold of the student and teacher files. I've made sure that she won't read them. Not that she would, but her possibly being able to access them would already be a huge problem, and since I'm just a beginner at this, I figured I should work on the security cameras. All cameras in the student dorms, classrooms, and offices are good to go, so all that's left are the training grounds and the teacher's dorm. My God! What? What is it? Shota asked, urgency filling his tone as he prepared himself to whip out his machete and kill the hypothetical intruder Midoriya saw. The cameras, showing the front doors to the teacher's dorm building, is easily accessible. It only took me a few codes and I was in. Midoriya whispered, yelled, hands flying around and randomly grasping at air as if the kid couldn't decide what weapon he might need at the moment. It's something Shota used to have a struggle with, which is why he keeps his utility belt loaded with at least 5 knives at all times. In fact, he should suggest Midoriya do the same. No, that's a horrible idea, and you know it, dumbass. Oh, this is bad. This is really bad. I can't know how long these are available to any decent hacker, but worst case scenario is probably since last June. That's 7 months ago. More than enough time to learn the coming and going schedules of the staff, find a time slot loophole, gather a team of villains, plan an infiltration, and murder everybody in the building, only to leave no evidence behind other than a single symbolic flower. Oh, Shota drew out, shoulders microscopically sagging in relief as he came to terms with his mistake. The underground hero shifted the computer so that the screen was more visible to him. You're referring to camera B16, the one with the northeast angled view. Yeah. No, accessibility's on purpose. You can thank Nezu for that. The green-haired boy tilted his head in confusion, and the man chose to ignore how he heard Uraraka whisper a quick "aw" at the very edge of his awareness. It's practically a reflex by now. Nezu knew all the risks and still chose to leave this kind of thing open for the public. Shota nodded in confirmation, and the boy's incredulous expression only deepened. But why? Yes, the answer for why, that the black-haired man knows all too well. Nezu and his logical ruses. Shota also chose to ignore the deadpan look sent his way at the pure hypocrisy in his words. He has a weird sense of humor and gets bored from time to time, so he pulled together this little thing in hopes of bringing some cheap, underhanded excitement into his life. I'd pity the rat's motivation if I didn't hate it so much. He keeps the camera here open because he knows it's a liability. Midoriya's face took on a pained expression, and Shota couldn't help but agree. And, because it requires us to constantly make defense mechanisms for it, it's just a never-ending test of the staff's resourcefulness, really. What were the defense mechanisms? The emerald-eyed boy asked cautiously, fearing the answer he may get in return. And he should. Jesus Christ, the black-eyed man's gonna need a lot of alcohol after this conversation. It's mostly just encouraging villains to not take this golden opportunity, and it's as difficult as you'd imagine. You know what, just see for yourself. The Erasure hero rewinded the captured footage to 1 week prior, prayed to whatever deity was out there, and bored enough to care about what he was going through, and pressed play. "But I just don't understand," Ishiyama wailed, stone-cold slabs of a hand, furiously wiping at his eyes as he burst through the doors, ectoplasm right on his heels. "How could the story just end like that? There wasn't any solution to the new form of government in the end. It was just 324 pages of depression. Those girls deserve justice, Ecto. Offred deserved justice." "June," Ectoplasm interrupted darkly. "The protagonist's name is June, not Karen, not February, and especially not Offred, you blockheaded bastard." The moment Ishiyama had realized his mistake, his eyes had blown wide as saucers, and he slid to the ground, clutching his head in horror. "What in God's name have I done?" A scoff from behind them grabbed both of the pro-heroes' attention, and Vlad King sauntered through the door in all of his non-existent spandex glory. "Why are you guys even bothering to read those pre-quirk books, huh? It's been over a century, just get over it already. It's not like they matter anymore," he said with a dismissing wave of a hand, oblivious to the clones now forming around ectoplasm at concerning speed. "Any form of media that involves a bunch of quirkless people is a waste of time as far as I'm concerned. Am I right or am I right?" "You're wrong," Aizawa breathed out easily once he shouldered the door to get in, saying those words to the blood-controlling ass like it was second nature. The Handmaid's Tale still carries a lot of significance in this day and age about corrupt governments and the subtle actions a large group of people had to do to gain even a modicum of power in a society that will always be against them. Sound familiar? The tired man barely gave Vlad a chance to speak before he continued. "Yeah, probably not to you. After all, not everyone is as educationally and socially stunted as you are, Vlad." "Wow," the freckled boy breathed out as he finished the clip, disbelief coating the syllable. "What kind of lunatic doesn't see the importance of Margaret Atwood's novel?" "Exactly. Lunatics like Khan, apparently. But basically the whole point of having these interactions near the cameras was so that villains would be fended off by the sheer annoyingness and chaos, or too intimidated and think better of their half-baked plans." "Well," Midoriya drawled out in a squeaky voice with a wince, "I can see how a villain may be annoyed at the prospect of heroes bantering instead of taking him seriously, but this alone doesn't seem like it would be intimidating enough to put a stop to them." Understandable. But the kid was so distracted by the conversation that he didn't realize the clip was still playing. The Erasure hero nodded his head toward the screen, and the kid followed the unspoken directions with narrowed eyes, resuming his watching. 10 of Ectoplasm's clones had their hands intertwined with each other as they slowly walked in a circle together, bodies betraying absolutely no emotion and making it impossible to determine who was the real one. And at the very center of the rotating circle was Vlad, arms circled around both his knees in a fetal position as he rocked back and forth on the floor, sobbing. "Blessed be the fruit," the clones chanted in a monotone voice. "Blessed be the fruit. Blessed be the fruit. Blessed be the fruit." No, that's intimidating," his student muttered loud enough for Shota to hear, but mostly to himself. And Shota couldn't even judge him for it. The moment Ectoplasm's clones grasped each other's hands, he got the hell out of there. He had already known what was going to happen because it happened to Nemuri before when she dared to question the accuracy of Greek myths in Percy Jackson. It was disturbing, to say the least, and he wishes he had alcohol at that moment. But speaking of needing alcohol, "It doesn't just stop there," the tired man said with his usual sly grin. If he had to suffer while participating in these videos, then others had to suffer when they watch it. Then, without any further hesitation, he flipped to the next clip. "Somebody come get her," Nemuri sang boisterously in her drunken state. Stumbling through the door, she clutched her heels in one hand and practically dug her nails into Aizawa's forearm with the other for support. "She's dancing like a stripper. Nemuri, I swear to God." "Somebody come get her." "You've been repeating the same 2 lines for the last hour." "I actually don't know the rest of the lyrics, though," Midoriya stated, with a finger pressed to his cheek in thought, completely bypassing the obvious question as to why Nemuri was drunk in the first place, which, now that Shota thinks about it, is very Midoriya-like, always focusing on the smaller details rather than what everyone else pays attention to. Sometimes it's a disadvantage, and other times it's a greatly appreciated gift. The underground hero couldn't tell what it was right now, though. On one hand, he's glad the kid isn't prying into info on his purple-haired friend's strange behavior for a person that's supposed to be a role model to children. On the other hand, he's concerned about why he isn't prying. No widened eyes, no gasps, no shaking of a head, and an obnoxious call to UA's school board, which happened once, by the way. No, nothing. Not a single sign of surprise, as if Midoriya had already expected this from his art history teacher, and this video had just confirmed his suspicions, in which case, Shota really needs to talk to Todoroki again. "Yeah, me neither." The next clip showed Hisashi singing the lyrics to Halo while single-handedly flipping out his sleeked microphone, the one he carries with him in his suit at all times for fluffing aesthetic reasons, Shochan, and he continued his singing. 13 chanted Halo in support. Oh wait, was that the screeching sound I heard at 3 a.m.? Why the hell was the kid awake at 3 in the morning? Shoto would be a hypocrite to judge, but he's not the one who still has a developing brain. No, this is the scream that shattered all the windows in the building at 2:55. The one you're referring to is the one Mike made 5 minutes later, after I'd found the windows and started chasing him with a steak knife. Ah, okay. The boy proceeded to scribble down something in his notebook, and Shota would gladly never question what it was. Hey, Aizawa. Powerloader started, jogging up to the doors as he flipped through the pages of his old UA yearbook. I'd always assumed you never went to a barber shop and just grew out your hair, but its length in your third year was only a few inches shorter than it is now. I don't think it's humanly possible for your hair to grow that slow in over 10 years, so have you actually went to a salon before, in which case I have to reevaluate everything I thought I knew about you, or did you go all Mulan on our asses and just slice and dice that shit with a knife? Powerloader flinched back as soon as he lifted his head and took in the sight before him. I don't even want to know what the hell the context for this was, but just to be clear, did you murder someone? Aizawa dragged his hand across his scalp, loose raven-black strands dragging up and out of his eyes as a result, so he could get a clearer view of Majima that wasn't obstructed by hair or, well, blood. The blood being the main focus here. The tired man's eyes switched between the apprehensive look on his coworker's face to the unconscious body of a Yakuza member that he brought to hold captive in the dorms for the night because the local police stations complained about how he'd already filled their in-house jail cells to maximum capacity to his blood-soaked jumpsuit with way too many rips, and back to Majima. No? The copper-haired man let out a strangled sound. Why is that a question? That's somehow the most normal of all these clips. Damn right it is, and Shota's pretty proud of that fact too. It teaches Vlad not to mess with him at all costs. And you guys are sure that these are enough to keep criminals at bay? I still have my doubts, but for the last 3 years we've been A-OK. Majima's sanity aside. So I digress. And if it was any real threat, I'm sure Nezu would have taken care of it by now. Him not doing exactly that just shows that we're passing his little test. Does he do these tests often? Yes, unfortunately, more often than I'd like. And what he'd like is none. But he guesses it keeps all of them on their feet. That way, when their life is actually in danger, they'll have already prepared for this. Although, some of the tests are less about improvisation and more about, how should he say this, pure sadism. For example, last year Nezu hired someone to cut 1/8 of an inch off of the heels of Hizashi's left pair of shoes, all of them, even the ones that he had back at his actual apartment and not kept in the dorms. How did he do it? Nobody knows. But they only found out after 2 weeks when Hisashi finally had enough of his hip pain, ripped off his shoes to throw in a random direction that just happened to be Namuri's face, causing her to stab the shoes with a knife in revenge, and quickly realizing the heights were off due to her excessive knowledge of shoes. He guesses the abnormal amount of information she has on them is justified, though, since she has to search for high heels that she can fight in for her hero costume. But in the end, Hisashi broke down crying and Nezu cackled as he paid for the shoe replacements, claiming it was a lesson on observation, and that wasn't even the end of it. 5 months later, the staff had been walking in the same hallway at the same time when all of a sudden the speakers crackled to life, and Nezu's chipper voice broke through, informing them that a round of "the floor is lava" would be happening to them for the rest of the day. Shota was just about to stick a middle finger at the security camera and keep walking when Nezu had said, as if he knew the underground hero would brush his first announcement off, that the winner could force the losers to do all their paperwork. It was chaos. Namuri bitch-slapped Cementos so hard he fell onto a cafeteria table and flopped onto the floor, where his purple-haired friend then used him as a stepping stool to keep moving. Hisashi thought he would be safe next to 13, as they had recently bonded over their shared love of Beyoncé at the time, but one moment he's humming the tune to Single Ladies, and the next moment he's unconscious on the floor after the space hero knocked him out with a broomstick. In the end, Shota let Namuri win with the condition that she help him take out 13, mostly because Hisashi kept screeching at Shota to avenge his honor. He didn't want the extra paperwork, but he didn't want a migraine even more. Later that day, Nezu had told them it was an experiment to see what decisions they would make if trapped in a room with limited resources, and wasn't that a terrifying thought? So yeah, Nezu gave a lot of tests, and the tired man wouldn't be surprised if there were actually more than he had been made aware of, or if there was one in action at every moment. How many sexual jokes Namuri makes in one day could be a test. The increasing complexity of Cementos and Ectoplasm's secret handshake could be a test. Hell, The creativity of Aizawa's insults to Vlad could be a test too, one he hopes he's acing. So really, anything could be a test. Maybe even this temporary position as principal was one too. Wait, come again? Excuse you, Brain, you can't just say that and then leave. Well, that's unfortunate. Has any of the staff ever tried testing him instead? The erasure hero's eyes shot wide open at the kid's words, not that the boy even noticed, too caught up in the realm of possibilities for tricking Nezu. I found a platter of cheese in his office once. There was a bowl of fruit on the coffee table that you would think is for decoration, but coincidentally it was all the fruits that mice can eat. The same goes for a bunch of diced veggies in the fridge, but there was also a large jar of candy in his desk drawer, which rats are known to eat. So all of you could just leave little foods around the school, steal some of his things, so he's forced to turn to those, and, I don't know, invest in some unusually large cardboard box cutouts of cats, or just bring in Officer Sansa. If he ever finds out, the explanation is simple. It's for scientific purposes to find out what species he really is. Shota sat in silence for a few seconds as the words finally processed in his brain, and when they did, he almost completely forgot about his crippling mental health. I think I found a new purpose in life, he whispered. Yeah, I'll just force Nomuri into helping me with that next week. We have more important things to worry about right now. Midoriya nodded, a determined look taking over his eyes as he pumped a fist in the air and muttered an enthusiastic but controlled, Right! The boy's hair shook as he whipped his head to face Hatsume. May! She looked over her shoulder at him, a manic smile that never seemed to slip present on her face. Were you able to break in? Yeah, now that Shota thinks about it, this may not have been a good activity for heroes in training. At least not in the public's eye. Nah, Nezu's got this thing down airtight. The moment I even brushed the surface of the firewall, pop-up appeared on the screen with all my information, my family's information, and the live security footage of my prize baby that I'm going to present as my final project this semester. What? Did Nezu seriously have access to not only his students' lives, but their extended relatives? Actually, more importantly, why is this blackmail already prepared? And if he has this for just one single student that's only been here for 2 years, then what kind of information does he have on Shota, a guy he's known for 15 years? And why does Hatsume seem excited? I gotta ask him how to do that later. Huh. But anywho, you're good to go, so I'll just head on back to my babies. And make sure you don't forget you're part of the deal. I help you with this, and you make sure Shinzo goes straight to me for his support equipment. No getting sidetracked to Majima-sensei, or else he'll start warning him to stay away from me. He thinks all the equipment that I make will explode. Can you believe that? Silence. Yeah, that's crazy. Midoriya stuttered out cautiously before clearing his throat. But of course, expect to see Toshi soon. Toshi? First name basis. Shota doesn't know why, and he really doesn't want to, but he has the strange urge to give someone a shovel talk. And no, don't give him that look. He's not acting like a dad. He is simply making sure that any relationships don't hinder the boys' school performances. It's the most logical decision, and besides, who's he even going to give it to? They're both his students. Is he just supposed to gather them in the same room to talk to them? And alternate between which one he's facing after every word until he eventually snaps his neck? And for Christ's sakes, this isn't even the point right now. Hatsume flashed the freckled boy a grin before skating off. Yes, skating. Apparently she followed through with the promise of fixing the red prototype shoes she made for Midoriya during the first day of this whole principal secretary shebang. Wow. It was last week, and it still feels like a long time ago. Fuck. Is he really old enough to lose his concept of time? He doesn't know how he feels about this whole nostalgia thing. The underground hero spared one more moment of contemplating what age he should let himself die to avoid being old enough to need help taking a shit before turning around to the masked group of kids. There are no digital loopholes in our security. Stage 1 complete. On to Stage 2. Shota bared his teeth at the teenagers and watched with amusement as the blood drained from their faces. Get ready. Stealth mode group. I don't know about you, Mito, but I don't really plan on getting expelled today. Shinso's bored voice rang out through the earpiece, echoing around the metal walls of the vents he entered with surprising ease, by the way. It's not like it was completely unexpected of him, as Izuku had a theory that he'd been using it as a transportation system way before he invited the boy to coffee, but it was impressive nonetheless. So impressive that Aizawa-sensei had immediately said he needed to lock that skill down. So crazily impressive that it's now the most significant aspect of the stealth group's plan. I don't think we even can get expelled, Toshi. Usually Aizawa-sensei is the one to handle those things, and right now... The green-haired boy looked over his shoulder to see his teacher, silently laughing to himself with a grin that promised pain and destruction as he stared at Yue's windows. He seems pretty satisfied with how things are going. Touché. Shinso chuckled out before grunting a bit at how he had to contort his body to turn the corner. But How can we be sure that he's the only guy with expulsion privileges around here? Why not, I don't know, Mike-sensei? Izuku turned away from his teacher to give a really look at his computer screen, even though he knew his lilac-eyed friend couldn't see it, the same screen that was currently displaying everything Shinso was seeing through his new glasses, courtesy of Hatsume Industries, as he'd been instructed to say whenever any potential investors were within a 6-foot radius. Does Mike-sensei really strike you as the type of person to expel an entire class of first-years? He had to give Kaminari and Kirishima detention a few weeks ago because they made a game out of how fast they could repeatedly slap each other's faces in. I think he almost cried. He just cares too much. Not that it was a bad thing. It's just that his last English teacher wasn't exactly picture-perfect, given that he once told Izuku to be like Juliet and realize when their only shot at living, their dream is dead. It was nice, having a teacher that would correct him on his occasional pronunciation slip-ups without calling it out in front of the whole class. If anything, he's like a dad. Shinso snorted. Oh, please. By those standards, it would only make sense if Aizawa wasn't given the expulsion privileges either, given how much of a dad he is. Pardon? Izuku coughed, practically started dry-heaving at his friend's words. It took a few more seconds of clearing his throat, of gulping down the contents of his water bottle before he was able to speak to a very amused Shinso. He's a what? He practically screamed, but was wary to keep himself out of Aizawa-sensei's hearing range. You seriously hadn't noticed? The guy dotes over your whole class and me too, by extension. It's kind of ironic when you think about it. The most goth of all the teachers is also the only one who memorizes your midnight snacking preferences. Izuku's face heated up all the way from his neck to the tips of his ears, pale skin flushing, a rosy red in embarrassment as he tried to push down the memory of him scavenging around the kitchen at 1 a.m., only to find a jar of his favorite peanut butter and apple slices snack in a place that everyone knew was his unofficial fridge section. He tried stuttering out excuses and denying the false claims, because they were false claims, but Shinso was having none of it. I'm honestly shocked you haven't noticed. You're practically his favorite. Huh? Okay, that does it. Favorite? He whispered incredulously, because it was exactly that. Incredulous. Aizawa-sensei doesn't have favorites. He just doesn't function like that. Being his favorite would be the equivalent of being the tallest dwarf. Either way, you still end up with the short end of the stick. And even if he did, Izuku would be the last one on the hypothetical list. He constantly wrecks training grounds, he breaks the law an awful lot for a hero student, and for Christ's sake, his nickname is Problem Child. What about any of that scream's favorite? No. You're blind, deaf, definitely delusional, and you need to make a left turn at the next intersection, or else you'll have to loop around to the perimeter of math class. He heard a faint, thanks, man, from Shinso. Believe me, you're the delusional one here. The oblivious one, too. Then much quieter, quiet enough to make the green-eyed boy question if it was just his ears playing tricks on him. Oblivious to a lot of things, actually. But, yeah, you're his favorite. That doesn't make any sense. He yelled much louder than intended, and earning a strange look from his tired teacher. Oh, God. The boy lowered his voice again. If anything, it's you. You guys have had private training sessions together ever since last year's sports festival. You're casual with him. Yeah. I'm not the one who apparently threatened to murder his favorite coffee mug and still get away with it. That's some favorite shit right there. And no offense, but you're basically a younger version of him. Izuku hated to admit it, but he became the one thing he swore to destroy. A conspiracy theorist. Todoroki was really brushing off on him, and honestly, he didn't know how to feel about that. You got the floaty hair, the dark eye bags, the take-no-shit personality. Hey! Shinso gasped out in mock offense, and Izuku could practically sense the exaggerated expression on his face while he bit his lip trying to hold back laughter. Don't worry, it's endearing. The silent chuckling came to a halt, but the freckled boy paid it no mind. And you both love cats. Like I said, clones. So you're wrong, completely wrong. I'm not his favorite. Yeah, I know. I'm like his unofficial reincarnation. That makes me his second favorite. But all right, believe what you will, Mito. But at the end of the day, who did Aizawa let drag him around at the mall yesterday to find eerily specific pieces of hero merch that were only available at certain stores for limited amounts of time? Wait. Oh, and I've arrived. Wait, Toshi! Izuku cried out desperately. You can't drop the topic yet. Our conversation isn't over. The hero merch situation is irrelevant. It was simply a business transaction. I need to know that you know that I was not, am not, and will never be Aizawa-sensei's favorite student, or even runner-up, okay? Toshi! Sorry, what was that? His tired friend said as he unscrewed the cap on the vent and shimmied his way out, landing in a crouch with a thud on the floor of the front office. Can't hear you all that well. I think May's baby broke again. Tell her she needs to pay child support to get it up and running. Oh, come on. Toshi! Anyway, I'm going to kick off phase 2 of stealth, okay? Izuku silently screeched at the back of his throat in frustration. Sounds like an okay to me. The one-for-all user watched through his screen as Shinso stood up and quickly but silently maneuvered his way to the windows, unlatching the lock and pushing up the sills. Then, not 2 seconds later, 6 heads shot up from outdoor bushes and peered cautiously around the room before dragging their bodies up and over the ledge and into the room. Shinso roved his eyes over the sextet before turning to Shoji. Titan, take guard of the west end of the hallway. Listen in for any sign of people and send the warning signal if you do. The 6-armed teen nodded and made his way out. Shinso turned to Kororo. Eclipse, stay on the edge of the ceiling and trail Vlad King. Try and catch what he uses as his phone password, because I'm going to take a wild guess and assume his midlife crisis has forced him to use the same one for his computer. Izuku would laugh at the comment if it weren't the absolute truth. What he's concerned about, however, is why Shinso is so sure that 31 is the middle of Vlad King's life. The cat-loving boy then faced Hagekure. Prism, your job is to trail Midnight Sensei, especially when she's with 13. Keep your ears open for any gossip you overhear pertaining to Vlad King. It's the exact info we need right now. Izuku couldn't really tell, but he's just going to assume that the invisible girl followed directions. Next was Setsuna from 2B, and holy hell was her quirk interesting. Izuku resisted the urge to grab a pencil and analyze her actions, but he knew his gruff teacher, who had recently taken to standing behind Izuku's chair and looking over at the computer, could tell how hard the impulse control was. Shinso continued speaking. Regen, fly one of your eyes around the perimeter of the hallways on this floor and look out for any of the intruders that Titan may not be able to catch, and make the other eyes trail Apollo. And finally, the boy with prominent eye bags, almost as purple as his eyes, turned to Jiro. Apollo, take the post by the door of the teacher's break room, and record everything said between Cementos and Ectoplasm, especially if it has to do with something called the Handmaid's Tale, whatever that is. The audacity. Jiro saluted, but still looked a bit hesitant. Hope you don't mind passing this over to Midoriya, but why exactly do we need codenames again? Everyone in this school already knows who we are, and if we're going to use names, why not hero ones? Oh, that's a reasonable question, actually, and the only answer Izuku has is that it adds to the effect of being spies, but he'd rather die than say it out loud. After a few moments of hesitation, the freckled boy spoke through the earpiece. It's classified? Aizawa-sensei made a weird choking sound behind him, which he assumed was a poorly disguised laugh. Actually, now that the forest-eyed boy thinks about it, he hasn't exactly heard the man wholeheartedly laugh before this past week, especially not around their class. In fact, the first time he heard it was when he and his teacher were discussing the psychological, slight emotional manipulation with Kayama-sensei. Could it be that? No. Shut up, Izuku. Stop being this delusional freak that you are who reads too much into things. It'll come back to bite you in the ass later if you let it fester. Always has, always will. The student clenched his fist, nails digging hard enough to leave a mark in his palms, but the sting was enough to ground him in the present moment and out of the void of his conflicting mind. And for that, at least, he was grateful. Okay, you've been saying that a lot this past week. I just want to know if it's because you legitimately don't want anyone to know, or if it's actually classified and someone could end up in the hospital if the wrong people found out, because honestly, Jiro gave a chuckle that sounded more concerned than amused. Both would make sense, and I wouldn't even bat an eye, so... Anyway, Toshi! Izuku cleared his throat as Jiro silently shook her head and made her way out the door, with one of Setsuna's eyeballs on her heels, almost missing the way his teacher's fingers twitched at the nickname. How odd. Or should I say static? Eclipse sent a message with the password for you to plug in, 0422, so try it out and see if it works. As Shinso's camera showed him flying his fingers across the keyboard of Vlad's PC, Izuku couldn't help but press his hand to his chin and furrow his eyebrows. I wonder if it has any significance. Sure does. Aizawa piped in, turning to give Izuku a solemn look. April 22nd. Huh? What happened on April 22nd? It's not a holiday as far as he knows. It's not one of the many fake birthdays his teacher had been using to get a free coffee even though he had more than enough money to pay for it. It's not the anniversary of anyone's death. Oh. It was the anniversary of someone's death. Vlad King's. Izuku still remembers the horrified look on his face as he barely dodged being bludgeoned by a metal chair that went flying out the window. It was like one of those dramatic slow-motion scenes that you see in action movies so often. Izuku shivered at the memory as Aizawa-sensei continued, once he saw the realization dawn on the smaller boy. He must have made it his password because he knew he would never forget it. The solemn look took on a more sinister turn as the corners of his teacher's mouth curled into a feral smile. Couldn't forget. The expression was gone as quickly as it had come on the man's face and faded back to monotone. And this password is a constant reminder of that, so I'm going to give him some other constant reminders of his other failures. Hey, I have a question. Why do you hate Vlad King? The green-eyed boy watched as his teacher prepared to give a long, detailed speech, and backtracked immediately. I mean, I know why. There's a lot of reasons. He doesn't appreciate good literature. He has a prejudice against certain quirks, which is kind of ironic for a guy who wields his own blood. And I'm like 80% sure you caught him spitting in your coffee once. He did, and then I spit on his unconscious body. Justified, honestly. If there's one rule in UA, it's don't mess with Aizawa-sensei's coffee. Vlad paid the price. Majima paid the price. It's only a matter of time before someone else falls victim to it. And when they do, Izuku will be right there to record everything that happens. If his secretary position is going to end tomorrow, then he's going to milk the hell out of it until then. And if that requires him to bend his morals a bit, then so be it. He's got most of Aizawa-sensei's intimidation techniques written down by now, but revenge is a completely different story. So far, all he's got is be petty, drink coffee, and while that's really all you need to get the full sadistic Eraserhead vibe, he would still like some more details. It's purely for scientific purposes, of course, because there's no way he'd use them in real life. No way. The freckled boy nodded his head way too enthusiastically for a person thinking about revenge just mere milliseconds ago. But what started the whole revenge thing? His teacher thought about it for a second before replying. Jody Picoult once said, "When you begin a journey of revenge, you dig 2 graves, one for your enemy and one for yourself. And on that dreary autumn morning, as the leaves lifted from the ground, twisted through the wind in ribbons of red, orange, and brown, and carried the whispers of unrequited love, I just knew that... Fuck, I don't know where I was going with this, but I know I don't have the time to recite that whole goddamn essay." That's probably for the best. The green-haired boy was just about to ask for a break to go get some popcorn because the whole unrequited love sounded like an interesting story. Talk about a thickening plot. "You said he likes dogs better than cats 10 years ago in a morning I was already feeling horrible on. And here we are." It went from a difference of pet preferences to trying to murder each other? Zuko asked incredulously. He knows he really shouldn't be surprised at this point, but even this is a little shocking. "Well, when the guy's already somebody you're trying and failing to silently tolerate, it makes all the worst traits just stick out more. Like his tights, or the weird color scheme he has for his costume," his teacher explained wisely. The thought of noticing someone's worst traits more and more over time made Izuku wonder if he had ever been that way with Kacchan. Once they turned 5 and their friendship was effectively over, it was coincidentally the same time he started to really get into his analysis notebooks. He wasn't lying to Aizawa-sensei when he gave his reason for analyzing the people around him so often, working against their quirks and personalities and such, but there was a chance he may have accidentally left out some minor details. For example, the majority of the info he had written down for his explosive classmate was about his quirk and fighting style. But after the hot summer morning when the blonde boy exploded the last few dollars his mother gave him that he was going to use for some water, he may have also made several comments on why the baggy style he wore his pants in would prevent him from ever reaching the top 5 in hero popularity polls based on the appearances of past heroes in the last 10 years, as well as how the weird posture he has while walking will eventually lead to chronic back pain in the next 30 years, how the scent of burnt caramel that constantly floated around him attracted quite a lot of bugs, and also the fact that he exercises his arms more than his legs, and that his explosion flying technique is the only thing allowing him to move at high speeds since it would significantly decrease had he really used his legs, and that his kicks do way less damage than his punches or explosions. As he said, the little things, nothing too out of the ordinary. Oh, who was he kidding? That's messed up, and he'll never speak a word of it out loud. But Izuku had never really been annoyed at him for it, at least not in the way his tired teacher was annoyed at Vlad King. Maybe it was because he wasn't the one doing the ignoring. He was the one chasing after the spiky-haired blonde, caramel aroma and all. That must have meant he liked all those little details, right? Not that Kacchan was exactly ignoring him either, no matter how much he tried to make it seem like he was, since he was always in his presence one way or another. Sitting next to him, standing next to him, staring at him even before Izuku had turned to acknowledge him, things like that. It was strange, but it's also not the point right now. He guesses, in a way, he's the complete opposite of Aizawa-sensei, while simultaneously being a carbon copy. Instead of pointing out all the bad traits of Kacchan, whenever his explosive personality took a more brutal turn, usually aimed directly at him, he chose to find solace in the traits that he admired. Maybe it was a way of reminding himself that no, his classmate wasn't the bad guy, he wasn't the villain, because no one is ever 100% on either side of the moral spectrum. Izuku thought that slouch posture and the baggy pants were proof that Kacchan wouldn't ever change himself, just to fit into everyone else's ideal of a goody-two-shoes hero. He thought the slight errors in effective workout routine showed although Kacchan might be incredibly powerful, everyone has their weak points, that maybe one day they could help turn each other's weaknesses into strengths. Together. And as for the caramel scent, well, he didn't have much of an explanation for why he liked it. Maybe because it showed how even in an incredibly dangerous quirk, one that left starburst burns and flaming hot blisters on his skin, one that would summon the ringing in his ears and the dancing, dark green patterns in his vision, you can always find something beautiful, something that comforts your beaten and bloody body when no one else will, when nothing else can. The warm hugs of an absent father, and the midnight whispers of encouragement of an overwhelmed and exhausted mother. And because all these silver linings, he guessed they were the main things preventing him from ever developing a serious grudge against Kachan. Izuku wished he could have been more like Aizawa-sensei back then. He wished he could have hated him, because maybe then he could have been better. Happy. Yeah, the green-haired boy whispered as he was drawn out of his mind back to the conversation. He knows his teacher was giving him a weird look, and frankly, he deserves it after internally monologuing for a suspicious amount of time, but he didn't address it. Not because he was scared to, no, but because he knew he would talk about it in his next session with Hound Dog. Things are different at UA. He knows that now, and he'll die before he forgets that. So, not wanting to worry his teacher any further, he slapped on a smile. I had a neighbor a few years ago who said the exact same thing, except it was about his dad. What did his dad do? Aizawa-sensei asked with a quirked brow. He murdered his mother. Okay, so maybe this wasn't the smartest idea for a new optimistic topic of conversation. His teacher's eyes widened ever so slightly, the equivalent of a startled gasp for someone like him. Yes, I can see why that would make the other bad details stand out more. It's fine, Izuku reassured, waving his arms around in a panic. His dad might have killed his mom, but it was all okay in the end because he killed his dad 3 months later. Ah, shit. His tired teacher's eyes widened even more, the equivalent of passing out on a fainting couch. Someone just kill him already. He's making this so much worse. But maybe he can fix it with another, preferably more lighthearted tale. That wasn't the case for all of my neighbors, though. Like, for example, I knew this homeless guy named Larry who came from America for a job but got roped into a triangle scheme company and got stuck in debt. He told me a lot of funny stories about his old boss and how the guy's golden watches didn't even tick since it was just a way to show off the money he didn't have, and, Izuku cleared his throat. Coincidentally, Larry was the one who got me interested in hacking since he was such an expert on the topic, and he used his skills to hack into his former boss's bank accounts and steal all of his money. He's still on the run 2 years later. Who the ever-loving fuck are your neighbors? Aizawa-sensei asked, face unusually expressive, but expected, nonetheless, from such a weird story. According to the law, they're technically villains, but according to me, they're the quirky members of my neighborhood that enjoy some good old-fashioned spicy katsudon. The boy flashed a toothy smile, an inspirational thumbs up. It didn't work. Aizawa grabbed a chair and dragged it next to Izuku's by the table he set his computer on, spinning it around and sitting on it in a backward style so he was at the same level as his student. Just so I'm clear, are you saying that you regularly invited your criminal neighbors over to dinner? Yes. Why did this feel like the wrong thing to say? Aizawa-sensei stared at him with an unknown look in his eyes before sighing and speaking. So I have several questions. This was before we knew about their crimes, though, Izuku quickly explained, vaguely noticing how Shinso's camera showed him Googling photos of chairs, windows, the red rum scene from The Shining, and newborn babies. Huh. What did he need those for? Nevertheless, Izuku still forwarded him the messages he got from Hagekure about whatever Midnight Sensei was saying. And even if we did, it was mainly petty crime besides Larry and Dad decapitating Daichi. Dad decapitating Daichi. He has a nickname. It was an aesthetic choice, really. That's what everyone referred to him as, but his close friends called him Triple D. He could sense the unspoken question of, you were close friends, but frankly, he didn't feel like explaining how Daichi taught him how to draw and bought him his first set of colored pencils. And if you ignore the criminal part, they were pretty nice. Every Halloween, they'd keep our house from getting TP'd. They'd help my mom carry her groceries to the kitchen. They actually helped me with my chemistry homework once. Uncle Akira, the ass-kicking almighty, was especially useful when he had to balance chemical equations. They'd also talked with my dad a lot. Weirdly, it looked like more of a business meeting than a Thanksgiving dinner, but it was a nice gathering either way. That's actually kind of wholesome, I'll give you that one. Izuku nodded in appreciation, knowing full well that's all he's going to get. But aside from the villains that you and your mother have apparently added as your unofficial family members, I'm more curious about how often your house got TP'd on Halloween. Who were the ones doing the TPing, and if Bakugo played any part in that, because if he did, I may have just come up with about 13 more ideas for well-deserved payback. Yo, Mito, cat guy, what am I supposed to add after the 10 photos of Handmaid's Tale cover fan art? I'm sorry, what? Izuku temporarily forgot about his teacher's interrogation and crinkled his face in confusion as he stared at his computer screen, watching as Shinzo added image after image to Vlad King's wallpaper. Wait, I actually don't know what was supposed to happen to Vlad's computer once we got in. His only responsibility was to ensure that his classmates in the stealth group got in and out of the front office without being caught, which he, unfortunately, succeeded in. Anything beyond that was Aizawa-sensei's territory. And knowing him... I do, his teacher stated simply, scooting his chair over a bit more so he was closer to the computer screen. The last couple things you need to add is anything Nomuri said and a gigantic photo of a cat, preferably a black one. I'm really laying the symbolism on thick right now. Is the cat your logo or something? Your trademark? Is Vlad going to see the cat and shake his fist in the air, yelling, "You haven't seen the last of me, Eraserhead," like a cranky old villain? Shinzo yelled, lowering his pitch to mimic the Blood Hero's voice. I don't know if he'd be that cliché. He's not a comic book character after all, but essentially, yes. It's even better because he's as horrible as All Might when it comes to technology. The guy's got no chance at removing this thing. Aizawa chuckled darkly to himself before continuing, ignoring the way everyone within a 5-foot radius, part Izuku, instinctively took a step back. What did Izuku do, you may ask? He gladly watched the terror unfold with a pencil in his hand, and his heart set on accomplishing the fear from others, as a professional secretary should. By the way, what did Nomuri even say about Vlad? Or at all? I know she has these gossip sessions with 13, and I hate to admit it, but I've never been more curious than I am right now. Izuku checked Hagekuri's email. Well, the first thing Midnight Sensei started off with was, "What is your opinion on skin-tight leggings in a hero costume?" To which 13 responded with, "I feel like this is a trick question with no right answer," which Midnight responded with, "You would be right. What about the opposite, loose jumpsuits?" The Erasure hero sighed with a dead expression on his face. I should have known. Izuku doesn't know what he's referring to, but he pities him nonetheless. And while that might have been a vague reference to Vlad King's costume, they didn't really go into much detail about him until a few minutes later. Aizawa-sensei raised an eyebrow, prompting his student to continue. Midnight then started to provide all the evidence she has for Tokahimiko being Vlad King's daughter. Hey, wait a second. Isn't that in Todoroki's conspiracy theory notebook? I remember him mentioning it after the theory about me and All Might. It's been over a year, and Todoroki still hasn't dropped it, although after this whole secretary thing started, he has started to dial down a bit, as if he was focusing on a theory that perhaps had much more evidence backing it up, like the theory about him and Dabi being long-lost brothers. Izuku would be lying if he said he wasn't the slightest bit suspicious, but he won't take this small period of freedom from being called a secret love child for granted. All Might's not the only person you're involved in a theory with, his teacher stated simply, an almost pained expression on his face, but in such a way where it made it seem like he couldn't decide whether whatever he was thinking about was a good or a bad thing. Izuku tilted his head, ignoring how he heard Kaminari coo a little awe under his voice directly after. People have been doing that a lot lately, and he still doesn't understand, but maybe that's for the better. Huh? Nothing. What else did Nomuri say? The green-haired boy looked like he wanted to press further, but ended up moving on to Hagekuri's next few texts. There was an emotional conversation about what Hagekuri thinks was the floor is lava game. Them discussing if Midnight should widen the width of her heel in her hero costume. Oh, she definitely should. It'd be way more convenient while still fitting her hero persona. A debate on who was better, Soka or Suki. Gosh, that is hard. To which 13 said they wanted to say Soka, but he loses points for being in the same bloodline as Katara. This led to Nomuri ranting about how she didn't understand why Katara never used bloodbending again, even after Hama was taken away, since she could have easily ended every single fight with it. And that brought 13 to comparing Vlad and Katara, and the rest is brutal, my god. It was never-ending comments about the similarities between Vlad and Katara, and the origin story of the unnecessarily large V-dip on his costume, and how he was basically just a downgraded Draculara. Shinzo cackled, wiping the tears from his eyes as he struggled to breathe through his laughter. Aizawa-sensei was much more controlled in his amusement, but anyone as observant as Izuku could easily tell he wanted to do the same. Oh my god, the creativity is iconic in this school. Where do you even get this content? Sell your souls to the devil or something? Like, you know what? That's not important right now. I'm just going to add in everything, Hagekuri texted me. And that he did. The Blood Hero's wallpaper was a monstrosity at this point. A cluster of images all randomly put in a collage that included an aesthetic cursive text for Midnight's quotes. The colors and sizes completely clashed, yet still worked together as an abstract masterpiece. Yeah, I'm going to need a copy of that wallpaper, Izuku choked out, scarred hand covering his mouth as his back trembled and he released shuddering breaths and barely conceived laughter. His personality had done a complete 180 over the last week, and the last thing he has going for him is his streak of never laughing at a teacher's misfortune. Not even in 6th grade, when the science teacher who claimed the boy should be extinct by now tripped over a chair and broke his hip, although he has a feeling his streak is about to break today. I second that, Aizawa-sensei stated, the white coffee mug, where did he even get that? Placed between his lips, slightly shaking. Izuku snorted. Gotcha. Oh, definitely, Shinso said. But just so you know, I'm going to absolutely wreck the saturation. It's going to look like the sun itself took a shit on this thing and... Took a shit on what? Izuku froze mid-snort, his body immediately tensing as his pulse thundered in his ears. Pale-faced and borderline hyperventilating, he turned around, coming face-to-face with a carefully blank-faced Vlad King. Oh no. Oh god, no, no, no. Jiro, Shoji, and Setsuna's eyeball were at the corner of his screen, and the green-haired boy could tell that they were equally as horrified. Probably because no one expected Vlad King to appear right behind him and Aizawa. Besides, wasn't Kuroro supposed to be watching him? Did he get caught after retrieving the passcode and get sent back? The only possible way for the Blood Hero to appear behind them without getting spotted by Setsuna is if he left through the back gate and circled around the entire building. What kind of psycho does that? He didn't dare utter a word as he stared into the furious eyes of the Blood Hero. His past experiences with angry teachers rushing back, and he could tell Shinzo was thinking the same thing. Instead, he sneaked a look at his homeroom teacher, immediately relieved at the usual bored expression on his face. Sure, the slight clenching and unclenching of the man's fists and teeth were proof that he was also shocked, or annoyed, most likely, but it was comforting to know that at least one person had their emotions under control at the moment. Finally, Aizawa spoke. Took a shit on your poor life choices, Katara. And just like that, Izuku's streak was over. All right, listeners, this concludes the first half to Chapter 7. So Chapter 7's so long that I'm having to break this one up into 2 parts. Hope you all understand, but yeah, this is about the halfway point, so we're looking at least another hour or so probably for the rest of this chapter. Let me know your thoughts and reactions to everything so far. This one always cracks me up. Aizawa's hatred of Vlad King just kills me in this fic. So the second half to Chapter 7 will be next. As always, thank you so much for listening.